Good afternoon. I am taking a break from changing my alternator to do a video. I'm going to cover a few things. This video is going to be about storage in different ways for different tobaccos, the history of pipe smoking, and some pitfalls with pipe smoking and how to avoid them. As far as pitfalls, one of the things you're going to experience fairly early on, especially if you're just getting to figure out your pipe and learn about pipes in general and how to smoke them, is vapor. Water builds up in this. It's generally not saliva. It's actually vapor from the tobacco that gets stuck in this part. That's the menon. And it gets stuck in there. And one of the best tricks for that is to have a pipe cleaner on hand, run it through here, and if need be, even open it up. Ideally, you don't want to open it, take the stem out too many times if it's hot, because it can damage the pipe itself. But you'll see there's a lot of moisture that gets built up if you have one of the metal filter tips, or even if you don't, you get saturated tobacco. That's why the metal tips are kind of nice, because even though it builds up in there, it prevents the entire bowl that you're smoking from being ruined. Also, take light puffs. That's one of the tips that's going to help you really avoid that vapor buildup. Puff gently, like you're sipping through a straw on a juice box more than trying to suck a golf ball through a garden hose. Pardon the analogy. As far as storage, here's lane 1Q, and once more, this is a flavored tobacco. It's one of the few ones that I do. And as you can see, I've got it in a mason jar like most of my tobacco, but it's filled pretty much to the top. There's a little headroom. There's a bit of oxygen in there for air exchange, but for the most part, it's as full as it could go without being a plug. That's for flavored tobaccos, that's important, because air exchange allows, or not air exchange, but air at the top allows for the volatile compounds and aromatics to get removed from the tobacco in the form of vapor. And when you open the jar, that all goes out. It's up in smoke, if you will. As compared to an aromatic, unflavored tobacco, this is Old Joe Krantz by Cornell and Deal. And as you can see, it's got a little headroom because air exchange is actually going to help it mature and age. I don't know how long it's going to be in this jar. I've got plenty of it, so I really don't have to crack it open. But I leave it that way because either way, aging it properly, even if you're going to have air exchange, is ideal. Storing it properly is ideal. These are some Bullseye Flake plugs that I'm aging. This is my future 10-year jar, hopefully. Hopefully I make it that long. Who knows? Maybe I'll crack it in 5. But as you can see, that's also relatively full. That was pretty much to the top early on, and it's reduced because as the moisture diffuses throughout, and I like to pack these fairly tightly, which you don't want to do with other forms of tobacco, because it will compress and become hardened and become all caked in and cause uneven moisture, uneven maturation and fermentation. But for plug, pack them so that they don't have a lot of space between them, but you want air exchange still in the jar, and they'll reduce over time. I don't know how much this will reduce in a number of years, but as of a few months, it's already reduced some. And that's because the moisture is regulating itself, and the fermentation process is evenly dispersing throughout them, causing them to become more reduced in general. It's they self-regulate the longer you keep them in here, and they might be kind of dry by the time you take it out. You might even want to hydrate them before smoking, but drier is better for long-term storage. Relax, it was me. Sorry. So these are the main ways to store. Scarlett, thank you. If you have any questions, again, as always, feel free to ask them and I'll be happy to answer. This is my non-aging plug collection. I've started reducing my use of plug tobacco just for expeditious reasons. I keep it in here, and as you can see, there's plenty of space. If it starts to look dry and flake, I add a wet piece of terracotta, and that's one of the best tricks you could have for moistening. A Boveda is better for long-term storage, 62%, 65% Boveda. Not for long-term, not for aging, but long-term storage. And this really doesn't require a wet piece of terracotta if you start to see the edges flake and start to see it come apart. And with all tobacco, if it starts to get crumbly or crinkly or dry, that's the best way that you can manage it, is just put a wet piece of terracotta in there. And so if you have any questions about aging, about storing, about types of tobacco, what about this type, I'm happy to answer it. I went over what comes to mind, and I think that pretty much applies to most things: regular tobacco, flavored tobacco, and flake, and plugs. And for long-term storage of plugs, you want something more with less capacity relative to the volume. You know, you would want maybe 30 to 25% of the jar to have airflow, and otherwise the rest to be more or less taken up by the surface area of the plug that you're storing. All right, so that's that. As far as the history, pipe smoking is extremely significant. In the Lakota tradition, and the Lakota are the ones who introduced pipe smoking to the majority of people in North America. In the Lakota tradition, pipe smoking is extremely sacred. Tobacco was generally used as a gift. They did trade it at the later period of westward expansion, but for the most part, it was a gift initially given by white buffalo calf woman to the Lakota people, and that became their tradition. And they used it for peace, they used it for serious discussion, they used it for ritual, for invoking the spirits of ancestors. Really, in the smoke of the pipe, a pipe was always a communal object starting out. And often if I share a pipe with someone, it's not so they can just try the taste of tobacco, it's because there's a social ritual within that. And it's not, ceremonial tobacco is used in a peace pipe, but every pipe represents peace and unity between people. That's the ritualistic purpose. And at a time like this one, where people are as divided as they are, where people are as hateful and irrationally malicious as they are, sharing a pipe of tobacco is a great thing. Another interesting facet is pipe smoking is associated with masculinity, when the legend is that a woman, someone with woman in her name, in fact, was the one who delivered this gift, who introduced it to the people. And so really it's a communal thing. It is not a male thing. It's not a manly ritual, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with a man doing it. I'm not calling it effeminate, but I'm saying the fact that women are implicitly seen as not pipe smokers, you don't see a lot of pictures of women smoking pipes. It stands out and seems kind of unusual if you see it, I think. I mean, for me. But it's not inherently a man's activity. It's an everyone activity. It's an activity of bonding, of unity, of peace, of invocation of greater things. Even though all tobacco is not ceremonial tobacco, ceremonial grade tobacco is very valuable and very ritualistically significant, all tobacco serves the same function spiritually in that cultural dichotomy, or that cultural paradigm, I should say. It is always there as something sacred, even if it's not sacred tobacco. It is always there as something to embrace other people and bring them into something. When mountain men started to come out, the mountain men were fur trappers, people in the fur trade who went to Canada, who went to Colorado, who went to the plains California, Nevada, again, westward expansion. When they started going out there, and they're the ones who chose cultural immersion over separatism and segregation, and that's a lot of people, because requisitely for their survival, having a good relationship with the natives was a good thing for them to do. Ultimately, you got a lot more out of being decent and being kind and being respectful of the culture of the lands that you were in as an outsider who wanted to make a home and wanted to make a life than you would riding in and killing people and being vicious and having animosity. And so it became something that if a fur trapper who was traveling westward had, say, whiskey, it was extremely valuable, and they would trade that for tobacco. If they had provisions, they traded. If they had furs and, buffalo skin that they made into a blanket, they would trade those to the natives. And the natives would trade tobacco, and they'd smoke it together. And smoking together was a very valuable ritual, not just in the Lakota. It became important for the fur trappers who did it at at their rendezvous, which was when they would get together and share their provisions and have sort of a campfire moment. These were people who were tremendously isolated most of the time, tremendously lonely, and in spite of the crotchety old fur trapper trope, and that is true, they were largely crotchety. This is documented. In spite of that, they were still very gregarious and very social, and enjoyed having the opportunity to commune with other people. And another facet of what the pipe did was when they didn't have that, when they weren't at rendezvous, when they were surviving off of pemmican, and that was like 90% of what they ate, buffalo fat with a little bit of protein and some berries in it, that ended up becoming something that would take away their boredom. It would give them something to focus. They could sit in the woods and not just stare at their toes. They had an activity to engage in that made them thoughtful, and that stimulated them, and that inhibited mast cell degranulation. So I'm getting into the medical element, but when they were surrounded by pine pollen and had come from what at the time would have constituted cities that were semi-industrialized, or at least becoming industrialized, and didn't have the same amount of natural irritants, that was tremendously valuable. That would help them to react less to the pollen in the air. It would elevate their mood. It would elevate whatever they were doing. If you go out and you gather mushrooms, the fun way to do it is with a pipe. It's still fun without a pipe, but it's very nice to go into the woods and have a bowl of tobacco and just be there with your thoughts. It's a wonderful experience, and that's why they did it. The ritualistic element was because it's a satisfying experience, and satisfying experiences were used to elevate spiritual experiences. Feasting was not just something that you didn't just, eat abundantly for its own sake, but when you were around people, you would have a large meal. At, again, rendezvous, they would eat a large amount of food. These guys, after surviving on buffalo fat most of the time, really learned to enjoy company and food. And pipe smoking, obviously, is something that can be even more gratifying after a large meal, which they would often have. But it solidified relationships between those people who were coming in and, I guess, getting the read of the land and also making a living in a quiet way, and the natives who were already here, who simply didn't want their land taken away, but were largely welcoming, most tribes, towards these people. So, that's why it has historical significance, and that's part of the value still for me. I don't feel that the cultural elements are erased because it becomes a ubiquitous hobby practiced by people who don't subscribe to that way of thinking. The Zen monks who started smoking out of clay pipes had the same observation, that it's peaceful, that it's settling, that it helps you compose yourself and your thoughts and your ideas. And ultimately, that's what pipe smoking is for, to give you a Zen-like sense of connection and disconnection in the appropriate avenues. You disconnect from strife, from obtrusive thoughts, from abrasive people who you dealt with whenever, from civilization's woes. And you go out and you fish, or you gather, or you sit at home by the fire in your cabin that you built, and you have a sense of peace with yourself, with your animals, if you have animals, with whatever else and whoever else is there. Because there's always someone else there, right? It's a way of evoking ancestors, spirits of the land that are there, whether you acknowledge them or not, and it's a way of acknowledging them. And once they're there, you feel a sense of reverence. You connect to the land and to your environment in a different way, to people in a different way. Sadly, that tradition was broken. You shouldn't be in a cloud of pipe smoke and also be vicious, and also be mean, and also be thoughtless. You shouldn't do things that are ignorant to what it is, because it's disrespectful to the spirits that you are invoking by doing this. And that's always been my belief. Pipe smoking is not just an activity. It's not just a hobby, although it is one. It's an oral tradition. You get a pipe outlives the smoker, and it's passed to another person after you die. Most pipes don't just get thrown out, I hope. Very often they get sold, they get gifted, they get provided to others, and that's someone giving something from their mouth to another person's mouth, from breath to breath. The same with sharing a pipe. You are sharing your breath with another person. You are fusing them by way of the smoke. You can't tell your smoke from theirs. They combine. And so ultimately, your breath, their breath, they become one. And that's tremendously valuable, not just in North American native culture, but in many cultures. It's no different than the concept in yoga of, breathing at a uniform pace, rate, and volume with other people when you're instructed. Really, that's what it's about. You are sharing breath that can't be seen, but that's still combining, that your breath and theirs become inextricably one. And there's something, romantic about that as well. It doesn't have to be romantic, but ultimately I've always seen that as the actualization of a romantic moment, when you are sharing breath with another person. And so pipe smoking is a deep ritual. It's not the same as just lighting up a cigarette, crushing it with your heel, and walking away. And that's, to me, what makes pipe smoking valuable and desirable, and something that you would want to engage in, because now it's not deferential to the natives who have largely been driven off most of the land. Even if you happen to be native, you're not the people who were here, living either in longhouses or in teepees or in, on the plains when strangers were coming in. You're not immersed by your culture. Your blood is native, but your life is modern day American. And there's something displaced about that. But pipe smoking brings it back. And you overcome that displacement. You start to embrace history as it should have been, and something that can't really be replaced. So that's my argument and my history lesson in favor of pipe smoking. That's why I recommend it. And I don't know, hopefully this video helped. And if it didn't, I'm sorry that I made a 20+ minute video. I'm sorry the dogs went nuts, but it is what it is. And I don't know, if you found it helpful or informative, as always, feel free to comment. I'm not gonna beg you to subscribe. If you find it interesting, you're welcome to. If you don't, I don't care. I'm not getting paid for this. Do what you want. I'm just trying to help. And I hope it did. And please feel free to let me know if you feel that it did. Take care.